Yeah, so also just a little bit more about, about GenomeX and CodeX. So CodeX started as working on some very important problems around data interoperability to solve critical problems in the oncology space. And it's now being expanded to focus on work in the genomics data sharing space, as well as cardiovascular. So we've got a real large group of use cases. Many of the use cases going on now require better genomics data, in fact, to succeed. So I know all the other use cases that are already underway and ones that are being formed are looking forward to the work of the future groups here. We focus on implementation in CodeX. Implementation guides are the recipe. We need to build the cake and get it out there to people to eat. And so we do build implementation guides. We improve them but based on real experience in implementations and in the field. All the CodeX use cases end up with piloting real data, real patient data between receivers and senders, and often new and more efficient workflows. And that's the goal for most of all of the CodeX use cases. We're driven by our members as well, so when we can talk more about that later. But we really want to be member driven, focusing on the needs and the specific scenarios that are most important to the collective membership. So let me get on to, that's the appetizers over. Let's get on to the main course. And I'd like to, and by the way, if you have any other questions about CodeX in general, please feel free to reach out to Kimball and to me, and we'll be happy to answer it. But more importantly for today, let's talk about GenomeX. Arthur, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Steve. Well, first of all, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Very exciting to see such a wonderful turnout here today. We're extremely excited to have you here and to begin to really build the community and move forward. So as Steve mentioned, my official title is facilitator. I've recently been calling myself the chief instigator and rabble rouser. One way or another, let me just give you a little tiny bit of background for those that you don't know. And I do want to say, this will come up a couple of places. I apologize, some of you have heard things that we're going to be talking about today in various meetings we've had. Others are new and haven't, so I apologize if we're repeating something you've heard. We'll try and get through it quickly enough, but I think at times we need to kind of go back and just lay the groundwork again. So I am a member, I have been about almost 5 years, a member of the Clinical Genomics Working Group at HL7. And we got to a point with the FHIR genomics work that I felt very strongly, and I was talking to the co-chairs that about the fact that I was feeling almost like we were beginning to talk to ourselves. And it was time, it was essential that what we really needed to do was talk to the communities that would be using this spec. And so that was the impetus that made me begin to drive this effort forward. And I'm so excited to have you here today to hopefully be a part of that. The bottom line is, I think we have a very good, pretty mature FHIR implementation guide, resources, information model. But what we really need to do is have you guys work with it, throw it against the wall, try and break it, tell us where there's gaps, tell us where there's, where we need to narrow things down, et cetera, and then leading to adoption. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but that really is the impetus behind GenomeX. And as Steve said, what I love about accelerators is they produce something, truly something, working with the specs. It's no longer just the recipe. It's we're gonna bake a particular cake, strawberry shortcake. Great, we're gonna have strawberry shortcake when we're done with this 6-month project. So that's the idea. So with that said, let me just quickly go through today's agenda. We've already done the introductions. I've started the overview of GenomeX and the current state. We'll go into that just a bit more. We'll talk a little bit about the current community and those of you that are here and the efforts to expand that community. We want to take a deeper look and talk a little bit about what I'm calling conceptual timelines for the 2 proposed initial use cases, meaning these are rough ideas, and there's a lot of room for reality to set in, for one thing, and the community drives that once we get those communities set up. And then, very importantly, next steps for GenomeX, what we're going to be doing, what we would like you to do, and then a little bit of time at the end for Q&A and discussion. So with that, let's get moving. And as I said, this is where some of you may have heard some of this before. What I just said was in that very first bullet that, the Clinical Genomics Working Group has developed a very solid FHIR genomics implementation guide. By the way, you will have access to all these slides. That's a link to the implementation guide if you want to go look at it and you haven't seen it. But it's time to accelerate the adoption of FHIR genomics. Why? We need common computable data standard. We need to enable the incorporation of genomics into clinical care and the benefits that this will provide. I don't know that there's anyone on this call that doesn't feel that that's an important goal. I think everyone I've spoken to in the community does, and that's why you're here. A common thread in all the GenomeX use cases is the collection and use of data, genomic data, in a standardized machine-readable format, allowing the data to be used for many uses. And I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between GenomeX and CodeX. So as I began to talk about developing this effort, GenomeX, I talked to Steve, who, as he said, is the head of CodeX, and he said, don't build your own accelerator. It's going to take you a couple of years just to get all the big organizational stuff. We've got a home for you. And in fact, it sounds like from what Steve has said, this is something that they were looking to do for a while, is to create a home for other relevant accelerators. And so the difference between GenomeX and the other use cases within CodeX is that they are single use cases, very important use cases, pre-authorization, clinical trials, et cetera, but they're a use case. GenomeX and genomics, as you know, is foundational and not just to oncology, which CodeX is focused on, but all of healthcare. And so as a domain within CodeX, we are saying, okay, GenomeX will not be focused simply on oncology. Of course, it's a very important area and we will be looking at it, but it can be anything within the genomics area. And the domain itself will have use cases under it. So just slightly different structure that we're developing here. So that is where we are today in terms of the concept. I want to just say that there's still, we're building as we go, we're learning as we go. I think that's actually true of all the accelerators when they're younger. So, please bear with us. I try and be as transparent as I can when we have questions and we're not quite sure of the answers, but we're all trying to get to the right place in the right way, the best way for everyone. And sometimes we simply don't know how we're going to get there for a little while, and then we get clarity. So I'm being real transparent about that, because there are times where I'm like, not quite sure, but we get there. All right, one other thing, I just wanted to quickly, again, emphasize the goals of GenomeX. So as I said, the Clinical Genomics Working Group is there. It's a wonderfully smart group of people. They will be there as a resource for GenomeX to go back to as use cases have questions, as they finish work or feel that they need to maybe modify something, clarify something. They're absolutely a resource that I assume we will be working closely with in the various use cases. But this is a multi-stakeholder community, and it's a complex ecosystem, as you all know. You represent different parts of what I'm calling the genomics ecosystem out there, and we really want as many stakeholder point of views represented and involved as possible. And then, the flip side of that is we want to ensure that the fire genomics resources and IG meet the needs of those stakeholders. And we're doing that through real world pilots, as we've said. We also very much need expert feedback. And we'll get to this a little bit more, but we have lacked participation in the clinical genomics working group from a couple of key kinds of stakeholders. And I think this is our opportunity to get them involved and really get their feedback. Is what's been designed work for them? What are the issues, et cetera? And then of course, finally, the goal is to drive adoption of fire genomics through the accelerator and through the implementations that we're doing. So let's take a look at the first proposed use case. And we're using a very generic term. We're calling it Fire Genomics Data Exchange. This is kind of the basic apples and oranges kind of use case that we have to be doing that we mentioned already, which is standardizing the transmission of genomic data using fire resources. And so we've got, the idea would be that we would start with likely, I would strongly, I'm sorry, I wanna verify, can you still hear me? I heard a funny sound in my ear. I just wanna make sure everyone.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My strong feeling, but again, the community ends up deciding this, that's working on this use case, is that it makes sense, as is done in really all the use cases, is start with something simple. So for instance, start with a transmission between a laboratory and an entity of some kind of data. We'll just say a panel, whatever kind of panel, and start with that and ensure that that can be completed. Eventually, I would expect this use case to continue and eventually include the entire process. So ordering through testing, results return with analysis, and either into a genomics archive of some kind at an entity or into the EHR itself. So I absolutely would expect to see this happen, but I would expect to see that happen in pieces, maybe 6-month pieces, where each one is focusing on a certain section of that entire flow, and then hopefully, of course, the entire flow would need to be tested as well. So the thing that I want to be clear about is that the use case members, right, those that are on the committee of the use case will develop this process. And I would suggest that they're developing scenario-based profiles, that they're doing, import specifications, leveraging the Fire Genomics IG, and as I said, in some way, making sure that we're getting communication of structured genomic data from a laboratory. And again, you can see a little bit more of the details. I'm not going to read them there, but obviously, when you do this, there's a lot of technical details as well, and that's going to be a big focus of this work, right? Is ensuring, that how, and this is, I think, where the community comes in, and I'll just use one example. In the Fire IG, there's a number of areas where, for instance, there's naming conventions or conventions for delineating a certain whatever it might be. There's certain, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give a concrete example, but there are many areas where there are already competing standards, I'll just use that term, for how something is described in genomics. In the IG, likely we did not constrain to say you will use A versus B or C. We are saying you can use A, B, or C. It is, I hope, likely that part of what will happen in this community is the community will say, let's agree that A is the best use for us. Making this up, but this is something that could happen. And if A is the best use for us, that's great. That's how we're going to do it. And then we can come back into the clinical genomics working group, and in the implementation guide, we can say, you know, the community has decided that this is the best practice to use A. We're not going to probably, you know, take away the option of using B or C, but we would then stress A. So those are the kinds of really important discussions that are going to happen. All right, let me move on just a bit. Actually, I'm sorry. I do want to back up 1 minute, and there's a couple of organizations that are on the line. I'm going to surprise one of the folks, but we have two that I'd actually like to hear them. First of all, I'm tired of talking. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk. I'd like to hear them talk a little bit about why they see GenomeX important. And Jen, if I might impose on you, and I know this is a bit of a surprise, if you would be so kind as to take yourself off mute, introduce yourself, and just give us a minute or two of your feeling about GenomeX and why Pfizer is interested in participating.
Yeah, so I'm Jen Webster. I'm one of the, I represent Pfizer on the CodeX operating committee. And in my day job, I'm a real world evidence scientist within our Real World Evidence Center of Excellence. I lead our precision medicine efforts. And so Pfizer has a big interest in interoperability generally, but I think that this GenomeX use case or set of use cases is particularly important because, you know, one of the things technology can do for us, and one of the real places where I think we've seen benefit in healthcare from integration of technology is almost to act as a safety net, right? And one of the major problems that we face is information management, particularly within this genomic space where there's just one, so very much information to be managed, and two, it changes over time. So if a new drug comes out or a new clinical trial is available that targets a specific genomic alteration, that ability to go back and actually make sure that every patient who might benefit from that drug has access to it, I think is one of the key barriers we see currently to precision medicine being deployed at scale. And so there's several others, but that's the one to me that seems really compelling. If we can make it easier for EHRs to manage this data, not just once, but with the many times a year updates that are necessary to make sure that the data is always current and in keeping with sort of current understanding, I think there's a lot of good that we could do for patients and for physicians.
Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate that. I'd also like Peter, if you would be so kind to unmute yourself and speak to us, introduce yourself and speak to us for a couple of minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Arthur. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Peter DeVault. I've been with Epic since the mid-90s. And among other things, I've been deeply involved in our interoperability efforts and our clinical implementations. So several years ago, we started to look systematically at how our provider customers were incorporating genetic results and other genomic information into clinical care and research. And although they were doing very different things with that data, clearly one of the common themes was they needed structured data that went beyond what was available in the PDF report, which is the typical vehicle for conveying those results. So we needed a couple of things. We needed a way to represent genomics information in the context of the EHR, and we needed a way to convey that information typically from the laboratory setting to the EHR. So one of the things we do is build data structures, so that was well within our purview. But then for conveying that data, we looked to what was available on the ground, which was good old-fashioned HL7 V2 interfaces. And there is, in fact, an implementation guide for V2 interfaces that can help you take clinical variants from one setting and send them to another. And that's what we've been building on for the last several years. Now, there are a few different problems with that model. One is that much of the work, or most of the work in the clinical genomics work group at HL7 on the V2 model has ceased. And that's been true for a few years now. So anytime we need to do something new with a laboratory or a customer, like add the ability to return treatment plan suggestions or represent a different type of structural alteration in the genome, we've had to do that ad hoc, and typically between one group and another rather than with a large group of stakeholders. And although work in the field always kind of goes before standards or goes further than standards allow, that really shouldn't be the primary way that work is done. You should be able to rely on standards keeping up to some extent with the needs in the field. Another issue that we run into is that not all of the newer diagnostic laboratories have decades of experience with HL7 V2, but if you put them in front of a stack of RESTful APIs, they feel right at home, the kind of APIs that we have with FHIR. And so it seems to us that the time is the right time for us to start to move in the direction of using FHIR as a way of conveying orders to laboratories and getting results back. And that brings up a couple of other interesting things. Why an accelerator rather than just the work that's been going on at the HL7 clinical genomics work group? Well, as probably many people on the line know, in the clinical genomics work group, as well as other work groups, that's where you're really grinding through day-to-day, building the standards and designing the information models that go into those standards. Whereas what we often need are people trying to solve today's problems with existing standards. And accelerators have proved really useful in that regard. So our experience with Argonaut and Da Vinci, for example, suggests that having an accelerator solving those kinds of problems of today with existing standards works really well, especially when you can rely on those work groups back at HL7, like orders and results or clinical genomics, to fill in the gaps as we find them, as we're trying to solve those problems. And if I may just kind of editorialize on where I think the work it could go in helping solve these problems, I think it would be a missed opportunity if all we did, as useful as it would be, if all we did was look to FHIR as a way of having an improved payload for the data, or even an improved envelope to put that data in. Rather, I think we should seriously look at the kinds of orchestrations among multiple entities a RESTful approach makes possible. So a scalable orchestration among the parties that hold genomic resources and those that need them for clinical research, treatment, and diagnosis. And I think I'll end there. Hopefully that.
That's great, Peter. Thank you. And thank you for looking at the really broad point of view as well, as you did at the end. I really appreciate it. Thank you, both of you. I really, I think it's just so important. First of all, you know, I'm tired of hearing myself talk about this. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk about it. I really get excited and energized by hearing members of actually members of GenomeX speak to it. Pfizer has been a member of CodeX, I think a founding member, and I'm really pleased to say that Epic has become a member just to be able to work on GenomeX with us. So thank you both very much for that. And actually, I'm going to piggyback, and I apologize. When I was back here, I didn't talk a little bit about some things that I wanted to, and so it's not on the slide, but I want to just get myself synced up again, and then we'll zip forward real quickly. The current community is, there are some folks that are on the line today that are already committed and becoming or have become part of the GenomeX community. There are others that are thinking about doing so. And then there are, I want to tell you a couple of key areas that we are talking, where we are talking to people. As you can imagine, and was stated a couple times just in the last few minutes, laboratories are essential to this work. We've had a difficult time engaging laboratories in the genomics working group for it's completely reasonable, as Peter said. That's really down and dirty and a lot of extensive time. This is a perfect place to bring them in, and they're critical. So we are having some wonderful conversations with laboratories. Can't say any names at this point, but we're very excited to be having those conversations and do expect, obviously, to have laboratories involved. And then the other one area that we haven't, that is not represented much here today, it is in some academic medical centers, but provider organizations, we've not actually made a priority yet, but we will, because they're another part of the ecosystem that's really important as well. We've got a really good representation of many, many, many different other stakeholders today, and I'm really excited about that. So I just wanted to give you that quick update of where we are. And frankly, this is still the beginning of building this community, and we're working really hard to meet with other organizations and to bring this compelling story to them and get them involved. All right, so with that said, let's go back here. And again, this is very, very, very rough idea, but I think this is kind of making sense, and again, totally subject to change. So just because people have asked, what is the timing here? And the answer is we don't know for certain, but this is what is beginning to fall into place that makes sense to me. So we do need to continue to grow the community. There is no question about that. And that, by the way, believe it or not, remember, we're at the end of Q2 already, so that's why things are Q3. We need to continue to grow community, and then we need to develop that community. We actually have to create the use case leadership team for each of those teams, and they can begin to gain their initial alignment and actually begin to scope out the use case, the specific use case. So within use case 1, scope out what do they want to do in phase 1 of that use case. Then I would expect in Q4 and continuing into 2023, of course, is that developing project plans, ensuring that the infrastructure, et cetera, is there, roles and focus of organizations, and if there's time, maybe we'll be lucky enough to actually begin some development towards the end of this year. So again, that is, with every caveat in the world that I could put on it, that's kind of where I believe things are falling time-wise for use case 1. So let's look at use case 2 now. And again, I apologize, some of you have heard this, and I'm going to be doing this very, very high level. Bob Dolan is a wonderful colleague on the Clinical Genomics Working Group. He works for an organization called Alimu. They've put in a lot of work into what is now being called our use case 2 already, and he will be continuing to lead that work in use case 2. So I just want to give an extraordinary shout out to Bob for all the incredible work that he and others have done with him to get us to the point where we are, and there's some pretty wonderful stuff that they've built already. So what are we trying to do with this use case? Well, as there's genomic data can be huge. There's many different types of genomic data, and there's going to be genomic data that very likely won't be stored in the EHR because it doesn't make sense. You're not going to put BAM files in there. I don't think you would put VCF files in there. You might put PDFs, but there's metadata, right? There's all of this other kind of data. So there are a number of organizations, including my own, that are looking at building some type of genomic repository and then moving the appropriate data that is clinically useful to the clinicians into the EHR and leaving the rest in a repository. And that data might be stored in many different formats. And as I said here, in other words, it can be a mess. And then some of you in your organizations don't have one of those data stores. You have multiple of those data stores, and that makes it even more messy. So, you know, the idea is, how can we, let me go back and say something that Bob told me at the beginning when he was trying to explain this to me. When his team was trying to build anything on top of a genomic repository, they essentially had to teach the developers genomics. That doesn't scale. And I think some of you understand what I'm talking about when I say that. So the idea here is to be able to wrap the repository, essentially, hiding the complexity, and then presenting a uniform interface to developers, regardless of the internal structure in the repository. And that's they've done an incredible amount of work to get there already, and it's exciting because there's a lot that you can do, and the key here is normalizing, kind of encapsulating the normalization of those data stores as a kind of foundational component of the genomic operations. And then that allows you to focus really and have the developers focus on the simple API level and the business rules type of level, which is where the real value is going to come from. So, you know, just a little diagram. What if doing analysis from multiple repositories or building a new genomics app was easy? And here's a couple, you know, out of the millions of questions you might ask, here's a couple of that you might want to be asking of this very messy data. So I'm going to give you a current state update here. First of all, there was a very successful Connectathon focusing on genomic operations at the very beginning of this month. Some of you, I think, that are on this call participated in that Connectathon. An open source reference implementation has been developed by Bob, his team, and many others. I'm going to just say the team because there's a lot of people that have been involved, and it's wonderful. And tools and best practices for normalizing databases for genomic operations have been developed and also will be freely shared. Another kind of very interesting and exciting thing that will be happening is that the ONC Sync for Genes Phase 5, which is called Standardizing Genomic Variant Sharing and Interpretation for Clinical Knowledge, will include a demonstration project based on FHIR genomics operations. And I know there are some folks from the ONC and Sync for Genes on today, so welcome. We're excited to have you, and really pleased that this work that Bob and I'm saying Bob, but it will be the community now moving forward on use case 2 will be doing. So one other thing is they've, again, Bob and team, many other people, have developed a number of simple apps here. Again, when you get this, these are all links right to those apps when you get the PowerPoint. A couple points I want to make about these. The actual code to develop these is almost, it's less than or about a page of code in each case. Pretty extraordinary for the power that you get. None of them took more than 4 to 6 hours to develop. Now that's with somebody that really understands what they're doing in this world of genomic operations, but that's pretty impressive. So I am going to do this, and actually somebody is going to need to tell me, do I need to, do I need to share this screen or are you seeing it? I think I need to share it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I will try and do that and do that. There we go. Are you seeing this?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. So just, this is the PGX screening one, and I just very quickly, let me actually, I think there's an even better, let's see if it's this one or the other one. Yeah, it's the other one. All right, so there is some, you can see this is real time. And what this is doing, and again, this is about a page of code, took about 4 to 6 hours to build. These are test subjects that are in there. It's bringing back this person's medication list. So the actual patient, this is the patient that we're looking at. This is their medication list. It's also bringing back any information we have about the genetics of this person as related to medication here. And then it's going out to Farm GKB and pulling in all the appropriate information about any of these genes that have been pulled up in relationship to this patient. So what you're finding is and then there's actually a nice little thing they've done. This is linking, this is saying, guess what? This is in this list here. And that's what this little icon means, that this is actually in, this is being prescribed and it's in the list. So, as you know, there's different kinds of implications for pharmacogenomics, decreased function, rapid metabolizer, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is listed here. Then all of the information and the evidence level, the CPIC level, and then a link itself to Farm GKB is also listed here. So I understand, this is cool looking, and it may not solve any problem that any one of you are looking at right now, but I am really aghast, amazed at the power that is exhibited through using these operations, thinking about this, that this could be done with really messy data, and it could be normalized in a way that can get you this kind of information and linking out to other websites to gain additional information with about a page of code and about 4 to 6 hours of effort. So there are others, as I said, that are, sorry, I need to go here, and I probably have to reshare my screen again, right? Or are we? I think I do.
We see the presentation mode.
You do, very good. Good job, Zoom.
Your notes and stuff, so you'll want to.
Oh, you're seeing the wrong one. Okay, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Let me display settings. Sorry. Is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much. Trying to get used to Zoom. So again, there are 4 apps that they've built. The links here, you can play with them to your heart's content. Actually, in the appendix to this deck, there is also information and links to the reference implementation, the code itself in GitHub, everything you could want to if this is something that's of interest to you. But I just really wanted to give a shout out to to Bob and everyone that's been involved with this. I think it's pretty incredible. And I personally feel this is going to become very, very important work for the genomics world in the future. One other thing I just wanted to share with you quickly is this is the reference implementation GUI. And what it's showing is the domains right here on the right that are set up right now that have operations under them. Of course, the goal of this implementation is to develop more domains and more operations. That's the goal. All right, I want to just make sure I'm okay. Our time is pretty good here. Good. So back to conceptual timelines. I will say this. I feel pretty strongly based on what's going on and what Bob and I see Shrikar on the call and others have been doing, that this use case can move forward before use case 1. And so I think that in Q3 that they'll be able to gather and actually begin to do their homework here, which is to dig into the current suite of genomic operations get everybody on the same page. It depends who's involved, but I think there's going to be some communal learning that needs to go on to get everybody in the same page. So, understanding them, sharing existing tools and knowledge, to normalize databases. Very, very possibly other members that come in are going to want to set up their own infrastructure to be testing this. All of that needs to happen, and then maybe developing some very easy operations. Q4, continuing into 2023, I would assume would be really more strongly setting up the next use of test cases that are in their next phases, ensuring they have the infrastructure and developments, again, ensuring determining whether a single organization wants to take on a particular operation or that work's going to be shared, all of those kinds of things, and then identify and build new sets of genomic operations and create a backlog of others. So I think that that's fairly reasonable for this use case. I'm a little less sure about the timing on use case 1, but I do believe this is fairly reasonable unless we run into some problems here. So with that said, we come to the big what's next question. So I've talked a lot at you, and I really appreciate your listening. A couple of important things. We're going to be sending out a survey. In fact, I think that survey is going to also be pasted into the chat, but if you missed that, that's fine. We'll be sending it out to everyone. That survey is going to ask a number of really important questions. It's going to say, first of all, there's a question about where are you on the spectrum of becoming an active member of GenomeX. That's important. Another one is, are you interested in working on use case 1, use case 2, or both? And then there's some open-ended questions. Is, what other types of use cases are you interested in seeing us begin to look at and put in a backlog, and some other things. My point is, please, please, please do fill out that survey. It's a really important way for us to get critical information from you. Then the next thing we're going to do is, based on that survey, another reason why it's important is those that responded that they're interested in use case 1 will be setting up a separate use case 1 meeting. Our first meeting like this, but now separated into the 2 use cases. So the invitations will be sent based on the expressed interest of each organization, and there will be 1 meeting for use case 1 and 1 meeting for use case 2. Then our meeting after that will bring everyone back together again. So that's just kind of giving you a little bit of overview of where we expect things to move, over the next couple months, I'd say. And I do expect those next meetings to be, I'd say, within the next month, is probably a good way to put it right now. So please, what we're asking of you is to respond to the survey. We're also really in a growth mode for GenomeX. So please spread the word about GenomeX. One of the questions in the survey is if you have a strong relationship with an organization that you feel would be a really good participant, please let us know and let us know who we could contact within that organization. And then our final ask is, get involved. We would love you to become, and I'm afraid I need to say this, paying members of GenomeX, so you can become involved in the use cases at the real level to drive them, to make the decisions moving forward. We're just so excited to have all of you here. I hope this has been helpful. I'm sure you have questions. Why don't we move on to that right now? So Mallory, are there any questions that have been teed up in the chat, or please feel free to put any questions in now. Please try to, kind of put general questions in. If you've got questions that are specific to your organization, absolutely, one way or another, let us know. We'll either in the survey or in an email, we will get back to you on those. You there, Mallory?
I'm here. No questions in the chat at this time. So we'll just open it up for attendees to share their thoughts and/or questions at this time.
Okay. I can't believe that we've answered every question. I've probably put everyone to sleep. That's all I can assume.
Nobody wants to be the first one. Oh, yes, please go ahead.
I was just saying, I think you did a great job, Arthur. It was a lot to cover, and you made it covered it very clearly, but it's probably a lot to digest.
Yeah, it is a lot to digest. And another thank you, Brett, for mentioning that. So again, I will stress that the deck will be there, and there's some very nice links in that deck too. So I really, actually, Mallory, I think maybe we can send the deck out when we send a follow-up to folks. We'll see, but we'll definitely have it posted as well.
Yeah, this is Wan Mei from Ontada.
Yes.
I do have another questions about the invitees or folks joining this community. Have you any thought on including regulator into the mix? Because it will be very helpful that to have the alignments to understand what the regulator think versus what the industry are moving forward.
So in this case, I'd like to understand what you mean by a regulator and how that would relate specifically to the data that's being put into the for clinical use.
Yeah, sure. So I think that for clinical use, right, I think it's primarily whether it is a medical device and how to make sure that the data is acceptable and interpretable and auditable from that perspective. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we can take this offline. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I actually think that I think that you're maybe used to in your work working in a different area. This particular area, it's not so much regulated by, say, the FDA or such. It's not a medical device. There's plenty of regulation, believe me, around EHR, High Tech Act, et cetera. But to put it, let me raise the question up. Are we interested in having appropriate government organizations involved? Absolutely. I'm very pleased to have some representatives from the ONC here today. Actually, the FDA officially became a member of CodeX itself. And as appropriate, we would love to have governmental participation, just to answer that question from a higher level. Okay.
Thank you.
This is Steve. Just one more. Anybody who has any idea, specific people we should reach out to, and email addresses or introductions you'd like to make, because even though FDA is a member and they're very active in CodeX, I'm not sure we have the GenomeX experts yet, and it'd be great to have introductions to anyone, any other organization or regulator. Thank you.
Absolutely. And again, we are asking that on the survey itself, and would really appreciate your putting a little thought into that. So I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, this is Jim from Tempest. Arthur, thanks again for pulling this together, and we're excited to work with everybody. One thing I think as food for thought as well, since there are many other CodeX activities going on, whether or not there are things that we can leverage or learn from data sharing or from some of these other Firebase codexes too. So
absolutely,
yeah, because I see on the call here, we've got a lot of people from different parts of the CodeX community, and I think there is a lot of group learning that can be shared. So we certainly are not starting from ground zero, particularly for use case number one. I just wanted to throw that out there.
I really appreciate that, Jim. Yeah, thank you for reminding us all of that and reminding me of that particularly. And you're absolutely right, and that's wonderful. And you're right. We're part of a larger community, and many of those people, have been working on different parts of this already. So yes, and just to broaden that, certainly our goal should not be to reinvent the wheel anywhere. If we need anything that is appropriate, that is other parts of HL7, not just maybe genomics, right? Just like MCode had to pull stuff from all over the place. Absolutely, that's what we will need to do. We're not going to just look at, one section of HL7, the clinical genomics working group. So thank you, appreciate that very much.
Yeah, this is a question maybe more for Steve Brott, but and I think maybe others would be interested in this. My understanding is that if you become a dues paying CodeX member as an organization, then you can participate in other use cases. You're not just limited to this use case. For example, if you're already participating, I just want to verify since others may have that same question.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. This is Steve. Yeah, absolutely. You join CodeX and you could participate in any of the use cases, not just GenomeX.
Great, thank you.
Somebody else was going to speak? All right. Well, then I will give you back all of 4 minutes. Again, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. We very much are interested in hearing what you have to say in that survey, and feel free to reach out to me, Mallory, Steve as necessary, or we'll point to the right person. Send it to all of us. Thank you again. Great to have you all here. Hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you all.